Hi, welcome to another episode of Faith 234. Yes, we're in t-shirts because it's hot outside and we turned the air conditioning on for the first time today, so we're weak. I'm weak. Anyway, today we're going to talk about Mosiah 29 through Alma 4, and there's a lot of transition going on at this time with the Nephites, and Lisa picked up how periodically throughout these verses the voice of the people or their example became an important thing, and how that's impressed her in our own kids. So you want to comment on that?
Well, yeah, and I guess in this first situation is where they're just introducing the reign of the judges and giving the people the opportunity to cast their vote. And you know, right now we're looking at an election year coming up. We can't complain about our leaders too much if we haven't taken the opportunity to vote, make our voices heard. But we want to, you know, as they did, elect or choose good people. So that's one way that we need to make our voices heard and be good examples of the kind of life we want to live, the kind of leaders we want to have.
And then also later on, how the voices mattered, and how living in the mission field, that can kind of take on a different form.
Yeah, we used to hear from teachers and leaders in the community how much of an impact our kids had in the schools and on the teams in different places, and you know that made us feel really good. But I think that's important to remember that in our everyday lives, we're making our voices heard, we're being good examples, and we need to be people who are lifting and not people who are full of pride and you know, tearing down others who are not like us or who we think we're better than.
Yeah, it was always, I never was ashamed to mention who my kids were to anybody. I always knew that I'd get a good report back, and I always did. And your good example, or the good example of our kids, I think went a long way in helping people maybe see the members of the church in a more positive light. So,
you know, and we know of, you know, a few who actually met with the missionaries and joined the church, knowing you guys as some of their first examples of members.
The next thing we want to touch on is Nehor. So we're in Alma chapter 1, and a few of the podcasts speculated, because we don't know a lot of background about Nehor, and I kind of came away from that just thinking how much more subtle his rise to prominence could have been than what we read about in the Book of Mormon. That maybe Mormon didn't have time to give us all the details, but that, you know, we can read about Nehor and other antichrists, and it's kind of obvious that, oh yeah, I would never follow them. But I think the reality is that their rise to prominence and influence was way more subtle, gradual, more line upon line, so to speak. And that can happen today. Sometimes we like somebody or somebody's teaching or philosophy or whatever, and it sounds good initially, and then as it grows, it kind of takes us further away from Christ, but we're so caught up into it that it can, you know, before we know it, get us way off that covenant path. So I think these antichrists are more deceiving, more subtle, more patient in their efforts than what it appears in the Book of Mormon. So
yeah, and typically they will start out with half-truths. They'll have just enough actual doctrine or truth in what they're teaching to bring people in. And so we need to have that gift of discernment. We need to have the Holy Ghost to help us tell truth from
error. Yeah,
from error.
That was a missionary discussion back in my days. It was called Truth versus Error. So, and that kind of goes along with contention, because, you know, Nehor contended with Gideon, and that didn't turn out well for poor Gideon, or really Nehor. And so people can have different teachings, but and if we recognize them for what they are, we also just need to be patient or be accepting in their beliefs and not contend against them. In my patriarchal blessing, it talks about the gift of discernment, kind of what Lisa just mentioned, and knowing the inner thoughts of men and women who may do harm and take steps immediately to avoid contention with them. It doesn't say take steps immediately to separate or to leave them, but to probably, listen to them, but then not contend with them. Now, if it's something terribly, obviously wrong or undermine the church, that's a different thing. But even then, I think the contention just serves no purpose, promotes no good. So it's better to respect other people's beliefs, even if they are false, and just go with it. Just let them believe that, but live by example what you really believe in, and maybe they'll come around. But contention is mentioned throughout these chapters a little bit in different places, and I just think that's one of the greatest sins, that maybe not even a sin, but promoter of sin that can be. And even in President Benson's talk on pride, his famous one, he mentions contention as one form of pride that sometimes we don't often recognize, which Alma gets into a little bit later about pride. So, you want to talk any more about pride or contention?
No, when he mentioned his patriarchal blessing, made me think there's just a line in mine that says, always remember truth never changes. That men try to distort the truth and, make subtle changes, which will be a downfall. But to always remember truth is truth, and that will never change.
I like that. President Benson also mentioned defensiveness, and I think that's been one of my big struggles, is overcoming defensiveness when there's confrontation or differences or whatever. My natural inclination was to get defensive, but that just prevents understanding and compassion and learning from other people. So, and I think some of these forms of pride are, again, kind of back to Nehor, are more subtle than what we appreciate. Sometimes we think, pride is somebody that just builds big mansions or focuses on money or power or whatever. But I think even faithful people can struggle with pride on some of these more hidden levels of selfishness, contention, defensiveness, and that's where it starts. So that's where we need to kind of guard ourselves and check ourselves to make sure we don't get ourselves into trouble with too much of that.
In Alma 2:18, it talks about the Lord strengthening the hand of the Nephites when they went into battle. I don't know that we're ever going to be asked to go into a physical battle, but I do know that whatever is important to us is important to the Lord. Our righteous desires are important to Him. So anytime we come up against something that we think seems impossible or seems really hard, we just need to take it to the Lord, and He's going to strengthen us and show us. And I think the times that it talks about here that they strengthened the hand of the Nephites and they were able to overcome the Amalekites and the Lamanites, even though it was against all odds.
Yeah, and Alma, prior to going into battle, was quick to pray. And I think that's a huge part of being strengthened, is that constant prayer and constantly turning ourselves towards the Lord. And that strengthening is important. We see that in these chapters where the people of Nephi, or the Nephites, were able to avoid pride, and then also are able to avoid curses, and that how some of the Lamanites and even the Nephites that joined the Lamanites became cursed. And that's more than just the mark that occurred on them, whatever that mark is, of a skin color or something they inflicted themselves. But the curse is actually removing themselves from God. And so when we turn to the Lord for strength, no matter what it is, that's going to prevent us from separating ourselves from God. Because when we do that, then we become cursed. In other words, our spiritual progression stops, and even maybe the generations or people behind us or that follow us also stop. Because if we're cursed, that can have repercussions to them as well. So, Being strengthened by the Lord, I think is a common theme, or there's common examples of that throughout the Book of Mormon. So it must be important if it keeps coming up. So.
And they always say, we turn to the Lord. We went to the Lord in prayer, carried a prayer in our hearts, constantly turning towards Him.
And that brings us to the chapter we both like at the end of chapter 3, or verse we like at the end of chapter 3, the very last one. 27, for every man receiveth wages of him who he listeth to obey.
And who are we following? Who are we choosing to be our mentors or our leaders? That we're going to, reap the rewards of that. And in a couple of the podcasts we listened to, several people said we're a sum of the 5 or 6 people that we're closest to. And so the importance of surrounding yourself with good people who are lifting you, bringing you towards Christ, and not turning you away.
Yeah. And also, where do we go for our information? If we spend most of our time in reading or studying teachings that undermine, attack Joseph Smith or the history of the church or whatever, that's who we're obeying. That's who we're leaning towards. And of course, the outcome is going to be, concerns, issues, troubles. But if we spend more of our time in the scriptures or in the teachings of the prophets, conference reports, things like that, if we lean that way, then, and that's who we obey, then we're not going to separate ourselves from God. So, the people we surround ourselves with, the information we immerse ourselves with or study with is hugely important. Not that we have to avoid the opposite sides or conflicting ideas or thoughts. We just need to spend more of our time around good people and in good literature, sources, information. So.
Yeah. And a plug for the lesson that's online this week. The talks that they had listed by President Oakes and Elder Stevenson were both just amazing. So, we encourage you to listen to the conference talks as well as study the scriptures, because the words of our modern prophets and apostles are very important.
They are. And that brings us to the last thing we want to touch on, is found in Alma chapter 4, verse 19, where it talks about Alma and his people bearing down in pure testimony, and how helpful that was to the church. And we even see that, later on with the sons of Mosiah and others. But how it's important to share testimonies when those opportunities come up. But in between, it's also important to be developing and strengthening our testimony. We can't bear down in pure testimony unless we're spending a lot of time in the scriptures, a lot of time in prayer, fasting in the temple, and things like that. So it's cool to say, we're bearing down in pure testimony, but there's work that goes on behind that or before that happens. So, and then and earlier it talked about being steadfast, and the people were steadfast, and you kind of mentioned that that truth won't change, and we just need to be steadfast in it. So, all right. Anything else you want to add or touch on?
No, I think just a lot of going through here made me think of you guys growing up out in the mission field and the good that you did just through your words and your testimonies. So just want to tell you again how much we love you and appreciate who you are and what you've done.
Yep. And keep it up. Don't stop. All right.
Keep the faith.
And keep the commandments.
Love you guys.
Bye.